We are now live and participants are filtering in. Switch off the off.
But don't you want to start the general statements in the beginning? And Chloe will come online. Sorry, we don't hear you, Jamie.
That was a good start. I'm on mute. Yeah. Okay, we'll get started now. I can see that lots of people are filtering in. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to this this webinar.
Give me just 1 second. Sorry.
Yeah. We are waiting until the participants come in. Jamie, can you?
We've already around 60 participants now.
Okay, I don't see 60, but I see 45 only.
Yeah, it looks like I was waiting for the number to stop going up. So I think we're ready to start now by the looks of things. Is that okay, Sarah?
Let's wait a little bit because Chloe has to jump in. They are still going up.
Okay.
We can.
Let's get started then, and our main speaker is going to join us in just a few minutes, but we can say our kind of welcome remarks first, I think, Mirella. So welcome everybody, welcome to this webinar. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Jamie Bridge. I'm the chair of the Vienna NGO Committee on Drugs, the VNGOC. We're a global committee that is here to represent more than 300 civil society organizations from all over the world and to connect civil society groups with the UN debates and the UN agencies, particularly those here in Vienna in Austria. So just to say a few quick housekeeping things, just to get us started today. We are recording today's session. This is to allow people to watch the session even if they can't join us today, live, so to speak. And we also have interpretation available. So hopefully at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll be able to see an icon for interpretation. And there you can select English, French, Spanish, or Russian. And we are providing translation in those 4 languages. So please select your language. Even if you are following this in English, please select the English option so that if there are any interventions in Spanish, they can be translated back to English for you. If you have any problems at all, please let us know in the chat. And you can also use that chat function to introduce yourselves. We'd love to know who you are, where you're from, which organizations you're representing. So please use the chat to introduce yourself to the group. And we will have time at the end of today's session to have some questions and answers as well. If you'd like to submit a question, and you can do this at any time, please use the Q&A box, which you can also see on your menu on Zoom. We can't, if you write a question in the chat, it's difficult for us to see it because the chat moves so quickly because there's so many of us on this call. So please use the Q&A box if you want to submit a question to our speakers. So yeah, we're really delighted at the Vienna NGO Committee. We're really pleased to be hosting these, co-hosting these webinars this week. We held one on Tuesday. And this one today is timed to work for an audience in Africa, but also in the Americas. The actual World Drug Report itself was launched on the 25th of June here in Vienna and also in New York. And we're really pleased to have UNODC colleagues with us today who are going to talk us through the report, show us some of the main highlights in the report. But also talk us through some of the regional stories in that report. And then we also have some excellent civil society speakers with us as well, Mariana and Mohammed, who are going to also speak and give us their perspectives from the ground. And as always, the VNGOC has selected these speakers through an open call. We always use an open call to select the NGOs who get to speak at these meetings. So I think that's all I have to say really in terms of introductions. If you do have any technical problems, please let us know in the chat and we'll do everything we can to help you. And I'd love to hand over to Mirella, who the head of the Civil Society Unit at UNODC, with whom the Vienna Committee is co-hosting today's event. So Mirella, over to you. Thank you.
And good morning, good afternoon to all who are participating in this session. I know that we had a very high registration and we have at the moment some 70 participants. Many of them are friends or will be friends in the future. So it is really an honor and a pleasure for me to just welcome you to this important webinar co-organized with the Vienna NGO Committee on Drugs, the umbrella organization with whom we have been partnering when it comes on any issue related to the world drug activities, and the Commission on Narcotic Drugs to facilitate your participation. And we organize also from time to time training webinar to make sure that to bring everybody on the same page on all the issues related to drug in the UN, and make sure that your voice can be heard in all the meetings that takes place under the UNODC Secretariat. I work, so as I said, I'm heading the Civil Society Unit, which is really the main entry point for civil society into UNODC. My colleague that you will hear later are really in the division, the substantive division, the division on research and analysis branch in the branch, and they have been. We will present today I must say, the most renowned UNODC flip chart publication, which is the World Drug Report. As Jamie has mentioned, it was presented on 25th of June at the Commission on Narcotic Drugs, and it was also an opportunity. Every year, the presentation takes place around that date, because it's also on the 26th of June is the International Day Against Drugs, and this year there was the theme was share facts on drugs, save lives. I'm sure, and I've seen that many of you have participated in this campaign. Thank you again for the work that you have been doing to promote really knowledge on drugs and prevention and treatment. Of course, many of you are really life-saving, I would say, organization, and thank you for all the work that you do in the field. Today the focus will be on Africa and America. Last Tuesday, as Jamie said, we tried to cover Asia, the Pacific, and Europe. I would like to take the opportunity, as we are waiting also for Chloe, who is our main speaker, the chief of the drug research section, to join in. I take the opportunity to mention another important tool that we have jointly developed with the Vienna NGO Committee, and it's the Ngo Marketplace. If you are not yet familiar with this tool, here Sarah has just put the link, so please do join us on this platform. It allows you to share your update, to interact with other organizations working either in the same region or in another region You can provide information about the work you're doing, the training that you can receive, or what you need and can be offered by another organization from another region. So it's really a platform, a little bit a kind of Facebook for NGOs and civil society and academic working on drug-related issues. I think we could start as soon as Chloe is ready, but I understand that there were some problem with her computer. These things happen always when we don't expect it.
But rather than wait, Thomas, could we hand over to you and you can proceed with your presentation on the data, particularly with a focus on Africa? I mean, Chloe can come in later to get.
Okay, let's do it later.
It's okay.
Fine.
Okay.
Yeah?
Thank you so much, Thomas. I'll hand over to you now. Thank you. Thomas Pitchman is one of the senior UNODC drug researchers in the research unit there, and one of the key collaborators behind this World Drug Report. So, Thomas, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for changing the order slightly.
Thank you. And now help me that it will work.
And in the meantime, we'll put the link to the report itself into the chat. So I do encourage you to follow the link and read and download this report directly from the UNODC.
I ask again, do you see anything?
Yeah, this is working fine, Thomas. Over to you.
Okay, perfect. So World Drug Report 2021. First of all, one issue we looked at, and these were the population growth and just the growth in terms of drug users. If we assume prevalence rates would stay the same, what would be the outcome over the last, say, up to 2030? And we would see a real strong increase in Africa. The increase in Africa is around 39% predicted in terms of population. What would it mean in terms of drug users? So far, clearly, most druggers in the world live in Asia. By 2030, they would still live in Asia, but Africa would already come very, very close to them. By contrast, not much change in Europe, not much change in North America. And if we go even a step further and would look into the urbanization, because we have seen an extremely strong correlation between the urbanization on the one hand and drug use on the other side, then we see the urbanization is predicted to grow by 51% between 98 and 2030 in Africa. Nowhere as much. Then second would be Asia, 24%. So really there's a high risk of a real massive increase in drug use in Africa unless something is being done. So and this is kind of the clear in the World Drug Report. Please look out, don't close your eyes. This is a continent which needs help, which needs assistance, and we wanted to really promote this and say, not just also based on facts. Now, the next issue, in Africa, what is the primary drug of use? Primary drug of use here is cannabis. We also see this in treatment. There's no other region where so much people are being treated for cannabis. More than 50% in Africa are being treated for cannabis. Second are the opioids, 20%. Third is cocaine, 9%, and 6% are the amphetamine type stimulants, and then come all kind of other drugs. So what we see, there is a cannabis issue. No other region has so much cannabis issue as here, but there's an emerging issue. As you can see, the proportion of cannabis is declining in Africa in contrast to other regions, while the proportion of opioids is increasing and the proportion of amphetamines is increasing and the proportion of cocaine is increasing. So also the kind of new drugs are emerging in Africa. Africa is not immune from them, but the bulk for the time being still continues to be cannabis. So first of all, I'm going to start with cannabis. Cannabis, where is cannabis grown? It's basically grown everywhere in Africa. Some hotspots in production are Morocco, Egypt, South Africa, Nigeria, Eswatini, Ghana, but you could go on. So this is just a list based on some indicators put together, but cannabis is really everywhere in Africa. Now, what do we see at a global level in terms of seizures? Seizures have declined. Normally, a decline in seizures would perhaps indicate a decline in activities of trafficking. This is not the case because this is largely linked to declining levels of seizures in North America, which is again linked to the legalization in some parts of North America of cannabis. When we excluding North America, we would still see an increase. And also the trafficking trend index, where we ask simply countries, do you perceive trafficking have increased or declined, shows a clear increase over the last 10 years. So cannabis is increasing, it's not declining, and definitely it's not declining in Africa. Just of an idea, population, the herb accounts for 21% of all seizures in the world of cannabis herb take place in Africa. This compares to a population of Africa of 17% of the global population. So even we know that Africa is not very strong with law enforcement because there are all kind of problems, we see the proportion of cannabis being seized in Africa is clearly above the global average. Now, which are the countries in Africa? There's really countries sticking out is Nigeria, Morocco, but also Sudan, Egypt, Ghana, and again, you could go on, but these are the countries reporting the biggest cannabis herb, the marijuana seizures to UNODC. When it comes to cannabis resin, we see the importance of Africa is even larger. Almost 30% of global cannabis resin seizures take place in Africa, 30%. And again, remember, Africa accounts for 17% of the population. So almost twice as much as the population is the proportion is cannabis resin. So we see, but here we see a concentration. The concentration is in Northern Africa. We see big seizures being reported from Morocco, and linked to this, seizures being reported from Spain, seizures being reported from France, Algeria, and a couple of Italy, also other countries. But you see, Morocco is really playing a pivotal role, not so much the other countries in Africa. In terms of where is the cannabis resin coming from being reported, clearly Morocco is #1 in the world, followed by Afghanistan. Chloe will show you again this slide, and it shows what are the main problems. And when we look now to Africa, the drug problem is really depends on the region. When it comes to Eastern Africa, the problem is heroin. Now taking cannabis apart, it's heroin is the big problem. When it comes to Northern Africa, the problem is tramadol, but also cocaine, tramadol, cocaine trafficking, but also tramadol is widespread in many parts of Western and Northern Africa. In Southern Africa, the problem is even much more complex. There are problems with synthetic stimulants like methamphetamine. There's problem with heroin. There's problem with cocaine. So it's a far more complex situation in the parts of Southern Africa. Now, let's start with the opioids. Opioids, we know, main starting point for the opiates is Afghanistan, and it goes and either directly to Europe via the Balkan route, it goes to the northern route, Russian Federation, and so on, but it also goes to the southern route, and this affects Africa. So particularly countries of Eastern Africa are affected, have been affected by drug trafficking operations. Now, more concretely, you see the countries mentioned in green. So basically, starting from Ethiopia down to South Africa, the whole eastern coast is heavily affected by drug trafficking, by heroin trafficking, plus Nigeria. These are countries very frequently mentioned as transit countries for onward transport, particularly to Europe. In terms now of the importance of seizures, you see Africa is not that important. 3% of global heroin and morphine seizures take place in Africa, so much less than its proportion in the population. But it's important because it's a localized problem. It's a problem along the eastern coast of Africa. In terms of, but we have another problem, and this is the problem of pharmaceutical opioids, and in particular, the problems of tramadol. Africa plays an important role for the tramadol, but the tramadol proportion has declined, and Asia basically has increased because of codeine. So there has been a shift at the global level. Now when we look at the global level, for many years, tramadol was the #1 pharmaceutical opioid being seized. So tramadol is a substance which is not internationally controlled. But in 2019, it was codeine, so codeine preparations, which were clearly #1. Now, on the tramadol seizures at the global level, you see here the particular importance of Western and Central Africa, followed by Northern Africa. Expressed as a proportion over the 2015-2019 period, 88% of the world's tramadol seizures took place in West and Central Africa, and another 7% in North Africa. So Africa accounted for 95% of the global tramadol seizures, and this is not a pure coincidence. It's also because there's a lot of tramadol trafficking taking place in this part of the world. Now, for India, on the demand side, take a country like Egypt. We see already that in Egypt, in 2016 already, tramadol was clearly more widespread than heroin. And if we take opium and morphine together, it was at similar levels as opium and morphine. Here we have data from Nigeria from 2018, and here's the pharmaceutical opioids, and you clearly see a very, very high proportion by international standards, 4.7%. It's really high, and this is largely due to tramadol. Tramadol, but also codeine and morphine, but tramadol is the main one. You see also tramadol in treatment, followed by codeine and pentazocine. And in cough syrups, you see codeine and dextromethorphan in Nigeria. What I wanted to point out, on pharmaceutical opioids, as normally you see far more men than women taking it. However, when you look at the cough syrups, which is basically the codeine preparations, there you see a higher proportion among women than among men. So this is something to also to watch out, to say there's not a natural law that women have to take less drugs than men. You have areas like the cough syrups, these codeine preparations, where there's also very, very widespread among women, also in Africa. Now, another big problem is the pain, access to pain medication, opiate medication. And we see there's very, very little availability for countries in Africa. The biggest in Africa is still the countries of Southern Africa, followed by countries in Eastern Africa, and then North Africa and West and Central Africa, almost nothing. So again, we shouldn't wonder that we have widespread use of tramadol in West Africa when people on the illicit market don't get access to the pain medication they need. So there's certainly an urgent need to change this, to help, to assist, to change also the perception that there is a need for pain medication, and people who need access must get access. And I think in many countries, including Africa, authorities have not accepted this fact, that there's also an obligation to give pain medication to those people who need it, and really we point this out in the World Drug Report. We see at the global level the big changes, but you see again Africa at the bottom, and not much change. Even with overall development countries, there was an increase. In Africa, we hardly see anything. So there's really, really a need for far more pain medication being given to people in Africa. Now, when it comes to methadone and buprenorphine, the people needed for people in treatment for heroin addiction, we see the relatively highest level in East Africa, followed by Southern Africa, and again extremely low in North Africa and in Western and Central Africa. But clearly more is needed, would be needed. So people also who are addicted to heroin must get the chance, and for the time being, they often don't have it in Africa to get rid of their heroin addiction. Now, cocaine supply, we know it's in South America. Most big markets are then in Europe and in North America. But there are also African countries highly involved, involved in the trafficking, being exploited as transit nations. These are countries like Nigeria, countries like South Africa, countries like Ethiopia, but also countries in Western Africa, such as Cape Verde, which had been heavily affected. Overall, the seizures in Africa of cocaine are low. We're speaking 0.9% of the global cocaine seizures taking place in Africa. But the quantities seized have been dramatically increasing. So we know there has been a clear increase in trafficking activities towards Africa, particularly towards Western Africa. In terms of the amphetamine type stimulants, globally, there has been an increase. Globally, it's methamphetamine leading. When it comes to Africa, you see here rather small amounts, both methamphetamine, also ecstasy, other amphetamine. So it's not so clear, the picture, compared to other regions. Nonetheless, the proportion of Africa in global ATS seizures is almost 9%. So it's less than its population, but it's definitely, it's there, and it's definitely a problem because there is production taking place, particularly in some countries of Western Africa and countries of Southern Africa. In terms of the methamphetamine trafficking trends at the global level, yes, there's the big story about North America and the big story of Southeast Asia. Africa is still very small, 0.2% of global methamphetamine seizures being reported from Africa. In terms of laboratories, Africa accounts just for 0.1% of all laboratories being seized. But also we know that some laboratories may operate and they're just not being identified by the authorities. In terms of the amphetamine, we see globally a clear increase over the last 4 years, but here the proportion of Africa is far more important, 11% of the global total. And this is particularly countries like Egypt, countries like Sudan, countries like Libya, where there is a problem, particularly of so-called captagon tablets. When it comes to ecstasy, Africa, the proportion of African global seizures is 2%. So still rather small, and we see rather concentration. The concentration here is particularly in countries of Northern Africa. So in global quantity seized, we see one African country among the top countries, this is Morocco. But you see, compared to many other countries, it is rather small. Where does the ecstasy come from? This comes basically from Europe. 70% of all mentions globally are Europe, and particularly standing out are here the Netherlands and Belgium, and they're also affected by trafficking from Europe to Africa. This is what I wanted to tell you. Thank you very much. I hope I was not too long. And now I think Chloe is online, so maybe she can continue. Yeah. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Thomas. And thank you, everyone. The questions are coming thick and fast, which is really good. Thomas, I don't know if you can see if you can finish sharing your screen.
I apologize. My hand is always the problem.
I mean, hopefully you can see the Q&A box, because there might be some of those questions that you can respond to while Chloe's presenting now. Without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to hand over to Chloe Carpentier, who is our main speaker today and is going to give the global overview of the World Drug Report that UNODC has put together. So slightly back to front from what we'd originally planned, but it's going to be good nonetheless. So Chloe, over to you if you want to share your screen. Yeah, and at the moment I can see kind of the presentation view rather than the slides, if that makes sense. Yeah, I think. Yeah, perfect. Over to you, Chloe. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Jamie, for the kind introduction, and I would like to apologize for being late. I had technical issues, even if I was not working from home at the office, no internet connection. This is it should be solved, I hopefully, for the few minutes of my presentation. So I come after Thomas, but the idea is to present you very briefly the global trends, the main what we consider some of the main key findings in the World Drug Report this year. The World Drug Report is very rich, so I encourage you to look through the different booklets, but I will highlight now some of these main key issues. So the first one I would like to present to you is related to the issue of cannabis and the fact that we see that cannabis products have almost quadrupled in strength in the United States and also doubled in strength in Europe in the last 2 decades. And we know that the potency of cannabis, the content in delta-9 THC, which is a psychoactive substance in cannabis, is also responsible for the development of mental health disorders in long-term heavy users of cannabis. Yet the percentage of the adolescents who perceive the regular use of cannabis as harmful has decreased over the same period by as much as 40% in the United States and a bit less in Europe. So there is really a mismatch between the perception and the reality of the risks posed by more potent cannabis on the market. And why this is of particular concern? It's of particular concern because research has shown that there is a link between the perceived risk of a substance and its usage, meaning an inverse relationship, meaning that the least harmful a substance is perceived, the more the use will increase. And this is not only the case in Europe and United States. So this is, I think, one of the first findings I would like to share with you. Then the second one is related to the availability and the trafficking and also distribution of drugs online, and in particular on the dark web. So drug markets on the dark web have emerged about a decade or so. So this is something which is relatively recent, I would say. But these markets are very volatile. You see here in the graph at the bottom of the page that they come and go. Some have been very big market, but then they went suddenly because of different factors. One of them, of course, is law enforcement action, but interdiction, but there is also often some exit scams from the market owners themselves. So they run off basically with the funds that are deposited on some of the escrow accounts. Now, however, despite this, we see that the main markets are now worth at least 315 million in annual sales. So it looks very large. That said, is only a small amount, a small proportion of the overall drug sales of drug markets in general, not only online. It's less than 1%. But what we see is that there has been really an increase here. You can see in the infographic on the top that in annual sales, these markets have multiplied by 4 since the beginning of the 2010s. So this is something that we need to watch out quite seriously now. Now, in terms of the expansion of online drug markets, this is not only confined to the dark web, and this is also something important to realize. We have seen that the use of social media and popular e-commerce platforms has increased, and this further suggests that the accessibility to drug markets is widening. We see that cannabis and other controlled drugs may dominate sales on the dark web, but on the clear web, there is often the sale of new psychoactive substances. So these drugs, which are not controlled, some, yeah, and also the sale of substances which are used in the manufacture of synthetic drugs, both synthetic opioids and also amphetamine type substances, including also precursor chemicals. So there is a lot that is happening there. We see that vendors are playing a cat and mouse game with law enforcement by marketing their products in different ways. They market them, for example, as research chemicals, or they advertise custom synthesis, whereby clients can request substances that are not included in the list of the available products, and then can basically produce controlled drugs too. And this is a practice which is legitimate in the pharmaceutical industry, but it may be misused by traffickers to basically distribute controlled substances. So this is also something that we need to monitor very seriously. Now, the third key finding I would like to highlight is related to an exercise of projection that we conducted this year to see how demographic changes alone will impact on the number of users of drugs by 2030. So globally, we project an increase by 11% of the number of people using drugs in the world, and only because of demographic changes. But this rise will affect, will be felt across the world. But what we see is that it's likely to be particularly pronounced in Africa. The projected increase in Africa is of 40% by 2030. So this is very high. We see that low-income countries account for the lion's share of this rise because their population is younger, and it is also projected to grow much more than in high-income countries where the population is comparatively older and is projected, in fact, to decrease. And another issue is that low-income countries will also see a major increase in the next decade in the number of young people in their population in general, which is an additional concern because drug use is much higher in young people than in other age groups. So this is also another concern. And now I would like to discuss with you the last set of key findings, which are related to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the drug problem at different levels. So on drug markets in general, we see that these drug markets in general were temporarily disrupted in most parts of the world, and many countries have reported that, during the first phase of the COVID-19 pandemic. But we also see that they have recovered quite quickly, in fact. But what we see also is that the pandemic has triggered or accelerated some dynamics, some trafficking dynamics that were pre-existing. So here we have listed a few of them, and they include the fact that shipments of drugs seems to be becoming larger and larger. There is also an increased use of land and waterway routes, also use of general aviation, the private planes, air cargo, and postal parcels, and also, of course, the increasing use, especially during the pandemic, but these have started before, of contactless methods for delivering drugs to consumer, including a mail delivery, but not only. Now, on the front of drug demand, most countries have seen an increase during the pandemic in the use of cannabis, the non-medical use of cannabis, and the non-medical use of pharmaceutical drugs, such as benzodiazepines and other drugs. And the changes in the patterns of use for the substances are less clear, except for perhaps those substances which are used in more recreational settings, I would say, or party settings, for example, ecstasy or cocaine, which have been reported as being less used during the pandemic because simply of less opportunity to use them, and because people don't meet, they don't go to parties, and they don't use this type of drugs. Now, another trend during the pandemic, which is not illustrated here, is the fact that in North America, we have seen a spike in the opioid overdose death during the onset of the pandemic. And something I would like to mention in relation to drug use also during the pandemic and perhaps after, in the period post-pandemic, is that many of the measures related to the COVID-19 pandemic that restrict mobility and meetings, etc., are known to have increased economic deprivation, and also are known to have increased feelings of social isolation. And these are factors that can contribute to increased drug use. So we have seen an increase for some substances, for some there have been a decrease, but overall there may be an increase because of other factors, basically, an indirect relation. Now, in terms of the different interventions that aim at preventing drug use or aim at providing services or treatment services for drug use, for people who use drugs, there has been a major disruption in many countries, at least in the early stages of the pandemic, for the delivery of drug use services. But then, after a while, many tasks that were once conducted in face-to-face have been carried out using internet-based technology, using telephones or the postal systems. And in some countries, there has been reports of very rapid innovation, which have transformed, in fact, what health professionals treating people who use drugs can offer. With a number of different innovation, with introduction of telemedicine to comply with stay-at-home measures and physical distancing rules, not only for the general population, I'm sure you have heard about this for the general public, but also for people who use drugs, for counseling and for initial assessments over the telephone. Also, we have seen that in some countries, there has been a simplification of prescription requirements and also more flexibility with opioid agonist medication. And some people suffering from drug use disorders have also been allowed to take home methadone doses. And this is something that is rather new. Also, there have been reports of countries setting up vending machines to dispense opioid agonist medication, and also postal services to distribute clean needles and syringes. So this is a number of innovation in terms of delivery of services that were existing before. Now, of course, many of these novel approaches will need to be evaluated properly so that we can better assess their effectiveness and also whether it would be worthwhile to mainstream them in the post-pandemic phases, basically, to widen the access to such services. Now, in terms of perhaps the more long-term impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, what is sure is that the pandemic has brought an increasing economic hardship to many populations and across the world, along with radical shifts in technology, with a lot of use of online means to get access to services, goods, etc., and also dramatic alterations in social habits that are likely to affect many things, including drug patterns in the long run, and both in terms of drug supply, but also in terms of the use of different drugs. Now, on the supply side, we see that fragile communities, both in opium poppy cultivation areas and in coca bush cultivation areas, have become increasingly vulnerable as the pandemic has affected their livelihoods. So they may feel the economic hardship a bit more than perhaps other population, I don't know. And this will only increase the appeal of illicit crop cultivation for this population. Then in terms of drug trafficking, rising unemployment will only facilitate recruitment for drug traffickers of new candidates to be involved in drug trafficking. And at the same time, we see that inequality, poverty, and mental health conditions are on the rise across the world. And these conditions are non-factors to push people into drug use, that cause also negative health consequences in people who use drugs, and may lead to a rise in drug use disorders. So these are all factors that will have a negative impact on the drug use, on the drug problem and the drug use problem. So the picture is not so rosy, I would say, quite grim. If I go now to the more traditional findings of the World Drug Report.
Just a few minutes, Chloe, if that's okay.
Yes, I only have 2 slides.
Oh,
fantastic. And the number of people using drugs. So we see that there has been a rise of 22% in the last decade in the people who use drugs. They have reached 275 million. And the number of people suffering from drug use disorders has also increased more, in fact, by 33% to 36 million in 2019. Now, the burden of disease of drug use remains very high, especially among people who use drugs, and in particular among those who inject drugs, which are estimated to be just over 11 million. Half of these are living with hepatitis C, 1/8 are living with HIV, and a bit less are living with both HIV and hepatitis C. We see that the number of deaths and the years of healthy life lost due to drug use continue to increase. We have an estimate of nearly 500,000 deaths due to drug use in 2019, nearly 31 million years of healthy life lost also due to drug use in 2019, and about 70% of the global burden of disease attributed to drug use disorders related to opioid use. So opioid use disorders continue to account for the largest burden of disease in drug use, I would say. And the last slide is the one that Thomas showed, just to remind everyone that while the world drug problem is perhaps a common challenge that is felt across the world in different countries, there are really a number of local dynamics. So cannabis is really a problem for across the world in different countries and in different regions and sub-regions. But then depending on the region, then different drugs will have a different impact. And Thomas has started with his presentation on Africa and will continue just after me on the Americas to highlight this in more details. So thank you very much for your patience and your listening. I invite you to go to our website and to look in more details at the 5 booklets. They are all published in English. The translation into the 5 other UN language will come in some months, I would say. But the first booklet is already in the 6 languages of the UN. So I really invite you to go there and to learn perhaps more. Thank you very much for your interest.
Thank you so much, Chloe. And yeah, I mean, it's very difficult to condense how much information is in that report into 15 minutes, and you've done a wonderful job. So thank you so much, Chloe. So thank you everyone who has submitted questions. There's lots of questions that have been submitted. I would encourage Chloe and Thomas to have a look at those questions, and maybe some of them can be answered quite easily in writing. But we'll also have time at the end of today's session, as I said. So Chloe and Thomas, please do have a look at those questions if you can. I would say please use the Q&A box only to ask an actual question to the participants. There's lots of just statements in there or people introducing their organization, which we'd love you to do, but you can do that in the chat rather than in the Q&A. It just helps us to manage it ever so, a bit easier. So thank you very much again, Chloe. I'd now like to hand over to our first civil society speaker on the agenda, Dr. Mohammed Audi, who is here from the Green Crescent Health Development Initiative in Nigeria. Hello, Dr. Audi. So yeah, I'll happily hand over the floor to you for 10 minutes. And really what Dr. Mohammed is going to do is tell us a bit more about their experience in Nigeria, following up on the presentation we had earlier from Thomas, to give us the perspective from the ground. So over to you, Dr. Audi. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Sorry, thank you, the moderator. I want to share my slides so that I can.
You should have a share screen option at the bottom. Yeah.
Yes, I do have just.
And if you just go to slideshow mode. Perfect.
Yep. So thank you so much, the moderator, and I'm quite pleased to be at this webinar. I also want to quickly apologize. I had a challenge with my data at the beginning of the program. I think with what my brother Thomas and Chloe Carpenter did present, they make my job a lot easier. I will just focus on our in-country, Nigeria, and maybe some few other West African countries' experience so that we can save time. As you have seen in my slide following the 2017 studies that put Nigeria on a very serious world map of those who are heavily into addiction. It's been a source of worry to a lot of us, more especially for those of us in the NGO world. 15 to 64 years of age have abused a quite gamut of substance, placing us above a global average of 5.6. As you can see, 14.4% in a population of 200 million, having 14.3 million people actively using substances. And one particular striking features of the studies is the increasing usage by women aged 25 to 39. As Thomas' presentation shows, cannabis, yes, is top on the list. 10.6 million users, followed by opiates. Cough syrups, yes, have been closely in the opiates, and we have tranquilizers and others in that range. When you look at the regions within Nigeria has 6 geopolitical zones. You have the northwest, northeast, north central, and southwest and south. And you can see the figures in the northeast, where we're battling insurgency with the attendant figures. But surprisingly, when you look at the overall data for the country, the south seems to have more issues of drugs burden compared to the north. But these situations have been, as we all know, have been occasioned by so many factors: the insurgency, the banditry, the kidnappings, and what have you. So the issue of high-risk drug users were defined as those who have used opiate in the past 12 months and has used those drugs at least from 5 occasions. A number of people who are defined as high-risk users are concerning in the estimate of about 376 high-risk drug users in Nigeria. From those who are at high-risk users, nearly 90% of them have been regular users of pharmaceutical opioids such as tramadol or morphine, as been in the presentation of Brother Thomas. Actually, tramadol have been on the increase because of the fresh access. Not only the normal dose, you have the drug in a special drugs with ranging from 1 gram to even 5 grams, depending on the demand. So the most common drugs injected in the past years were pharmaceutical opioid, followed by cocaine, as I have said. Tramadol, like I did indicated earlier, medication used to treat moderate to severe pain. It is not under international control, but under national control in a number of countries in all the regions. It has dual properties as an opiate analgesic with energy and mood enhancing property. This is why the non-medical use of tramadol has spread in various sub-regions, in particular North Africa, West Africa, and Middle East. In West Africa, North Africa, and the Middle East, tramadol, a pharmaceutical opiate, not under international control, has emerged as a major opioid of concern. The drug, in addition to being diverted from the legal market, is mainly trafficked in those sub-regions in those higher than those prescribed for pain, resulting in increased number of people with tramadol use disorder. Why does tramadol cause risk? Easy accessible, more profitable for traffickers, absence of international regulatory regulations, demand-driven, and consequence of drug use, of which, as I enunciated, the country is currently grappling with security challenges ranging from insurgencies in the northeast and all form of armed robberies and other form of crimes. And these are consequences of drug usage. In fact, most of these crime perpetrators, like the kidnappers and the bandits, more often than not demand drugs as a form of ransom payment to show how this issue of drugs has foiled the issues we're seeing: family issues, conflict, breakdown, loss of work and unemployment, legal issues, criminalities, or arrests, domestic violences, and all these things. And we're beginning to see the personal effect, that is to the individuals, affecting their well-being and wellness, issues of high blood pressures, chronic kidney diseases, heart diseases, and diabetics and asthma has been on the increase, and it has been associated with this form of behavior. According to 2017 report by International Narcotic Board, West Africa is still a key transit point just like our brother Thomas did allude to. Synthetic opioids, tramadol, which is not under the international control, is on the increase. According to the WHO report of 2017, yearly seizures of tramadol in the region have risen since 2013 from 30 kg to over 3 tons, a whopping 3 tons. Nigerian, in world reports, 2021, in 2018, 4.6 million people were estimated to have used opiate, mainly tramadol, but also cocaine and codeine and morphine, 6% male, 3.3% female. And then Nigeria has been identified as the most frequently mentioned country after India as a country of origin. The purchase and transit of tramadol over the period 2015 to 2019. The global quantities of tramadol seizures is also on the increase, 122 tons in 2017. The 2020 World Drug Report, tramadol is more accessible opioid than heroin, although it is still relatively costly if used frequently. Use of tramadol appears to cost about 1/3 the price of heroin. That is 3.6 versus $10 per day of use in the past 30 days. The 2018 report, the non-medical use of opioid is of concern. In 2016, cannabis 45% and opiate 36% were the main substances. Most people treated for opioid use disorders were misusing tramadol, codeine, and pentazocine. After the COVID-19 pandemic, people with substance use disorders have become even more vulnerable due to inadequacy of treatment services in Nigeria. Use of tramadol has risen to its highest point in 2017 and slowly decreases after that year. But it is still too reachable, affordable, and common, and people who suffered from tramadol use cannot find an accessible treatment services, even though 40% of them would like to receive treatment. How do we improve our work? We as Green Christian Health Development Initiatives based in Nigeria are working on prevention, treatment, and rehabilitation services for people who suffer addictions. With the data from UNODC and governments of Nigerian documents on drug use in Nigeria 2018 and World Drug Report by UNODC, we are able to monitor our country's recent situation regarding drug use, and we are using this document to improve our capacity while integrating these valuable data sets and evidence. Thank you. Before I really end with the appointment of a very focal, dynamic henchman at the NDLEA. A lot of seizures are being made. A lot is focus is being placed on really taking the fight to the traffickers and even to the users. And I think when next reports, probably the 2022 report comes out, we should be seeing a downward trend in all of these areas, particularly the what they call it, the opiate as well as the cannabis consumption. It's a serious effort being done by government, and we are working assiduously with them to see that these trends are downward and are being mitigated. On this note, I want to thank each and every one of you for listening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mohammed. I really appreciate your intervention. And as I said, there will be time at the end for Q&A. We're still doing well for time, so we'll make sure that we have space for this. So without further ado, I'd like to give the floor back to Thomas from UNODC, who is going to talk us through and provide a presentation now focused more on the Latin America region and the data from that region. So Thomas, if you're still with us.
Yes, I am.
There you are. Sorry, I couldn't see you on my screen. I apologize, Thomas. Over to you.
So I start now sharing my screen. I hope I will be successful again. Do you see? Share screen.
Not yet, Thomas. We don't see.
Nothing?
No.
Okay, let me try again, share screen. I don't know why I have always these problems. Do you see something?
No, no, not currently, Thomas.
Screen one. Share.
Okay. Yeah. If you just go to slide mode, then hopefully we, yeah. Yep.
Yes, you see?
Yes, perfect, Thomas. Over to you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Sorry, I apologize. My eternal struggle. So now I want to focus on the Americas. On the Americas, what in terms of production, what we have been seeing the last couple of years, there has been an upward trend. The upward trend has been in terms of cocaine production, even so in terms of the area under coca cultivation, the peak appears to have been surpassed, and we are showing actually a decline. Nonetheless, depending on the countries, we have Colombia as the biggest country of area under cultivation, 66%, followed by Peru, 23%, and Bolivia, 11%. We have seen different dynamics in different countries. In Colombia in 2019, there was a decline. In Peru, it was basically stable. And in Bolivia, we saw a 10% increase. Now, at the global level, we have about 1,784 tons of cocaine being produced, which is 3.5% more than a year earlier. Even so, the area under cultivation declined by 5%. How is this possible? We see a much greater concentration in areas. So less areas, particularly in Colombia, less areas are affected, a bigger concentration, but in those areas, the yields are higher and productivity is higher. And so unfortunately, despite this decline in the area under cultivation, we see an ongoing increase in the cocaine production, with a global number of cocaine users of around 20 million people. Now, when we look at the global level, we see the big shifts are from the Andean countries to North America, but also to Europe, but as well as to the other countries in South America. Now, in terms of number of people, we have about 6.9 million cocaine users in North America, and in Western Central Europe, 4.4 million. Expressed as a prevalence rate, this is 2.1% in North America and 1.4% in Western Central Europe. Still higher, United States, with a prevalence rate of 2.6%. This compares now with South America, 3 million people, or a prevalence rate of around 1%. And in Central America, 0.3 million people with 1%. In the Caribbean, 0.2 million people and 0.6% prevalence rate. Just one region outside, I just want to mention very quickly, this Oceania. In terms of numbers, its total numbers not important, but in terms of prevalence, it's important with 2.7%. So we have more people, a higher prevalence rate in Oceania than we have in North America, or even than we have in the United States. Having said this, the actual consumption in Australia is still very, very low, and unfortunately it is high in North America. So sometimes the prevalence rate doesn't give us the right indications. So people in Australia, yes, they use once or twice a year cocaine, while unfortunately in the United States, they use it far more often. At global level, 20 million people. We have seen what are the countries affected by drug trafficking. And drug trafficking, it is particularly countries in South America. So now taking apart Colombia and Peru and Bolivia, then big transit countries in South America are Brazil, followed by Ecuador, Mexico, Panama, Venezuela, but then also United States and Dominican Republic. But we will see quite a number of other countries. We see European countries important, the Netherlands or Spain. And we see also countries in Africa, as said before, also South Africa, Nigeria, also Ethiopia, being quite important transshipment countries for cocaine. Next issue is now when it goes from the Andean region to North America, the bulk goes via the so-called Eastern Pacific vector, followed by the Western Pacific vector, and 8% goes via the Caribbean. Now, how does it compare over the years? And what we have seen here, so the bulk still goes by the Pacific. However, the increase has not been the Pacific. The increase has been on the Atlantic side, on the Western Pacific and on the Caribbean. There is where more of the dynamics are taking place. And can we explain this? Actually, we can, because the single largest district, province in Colombia, where the coca cultivation takes place nowadays, has shifted from the south to the western part, to the north of the Santander, followed by Nariño and Putumayo. So and there's very interesting dynamics over here. So we have here the global cultivation in Colombia. You see since 2017, we see a downward trend, but in north of the Santander, we see an upward trend. So as a percentage, this western part used to be 3% of Colombia's total, now it's 27%. And this explains this shift away from the Pacific towards the Atlantic in more drug trafficking activities on these sides, and also the countries being affected. So this means countries being affected, very often it goes to Venezuela. From Venezuela, it may go to various countries either in Central America, such as Honduras or Guatemala, also Dominican Republic. Very often these countries don't have a very strong system or have problems, financial problems, and the consequences, there's lots of local involvement also in drug trafficking, and the result is lots of violence also related to drug trafficking. So these countries are heavily affected also by these shifts which are taking place at the moment. So in terms of, again, we now look at global cocaine production. This is cocaine in Colombia, and then we have Peru and Bolivia. And you see, as the last couple of years, there was a big increase in cocaine production. And here have the prevalence rates in the United States of cocaine. And what you see, yes, they basically follow the production, but not exactly. In the United States, where the prevalence rate increased by 33%, the US users increased by 46%, but the global cocaine manufacture increased by 64%. So you see, the increase in the United States was not as big as the increase was in production. This means cocaine has gone somewhere else. And one of the regions where it has gone to has been Europe. These are now the wastewater analysis data. And what we see from 2011 to 2019, a massive upward trend in Europe with different indicators, but at least 56% increase in the consumption of cocaine in Europe. When we use another indicator where we only compare cities which are actually reported data, then we can see the increase almost doubled. So an increase between 2011 to 2019, a doubling. So it's really, really, really dramatic. So between 50 or 60% and a doubling has been the situation in Europe. And similar situation was also seen in South America. So North America was not so much affected, but other regions have been, such as Europe, such as South America, but also parts in Africa and parts in the Oceania region, but also in Asia region. So in terms of global seizures, the bulk we see in South America, but then also followed by other parts of North America and Europe. But what's interesting on the parallel side is the purity. And what we see is the purity of cocaine at the retail level has really increased in recent years. So it means there was not just an increase in law enforcement and therefore more was seized. No,
ККН это означает, это не просто увеличение в...
Sorry, there's somebody talking to me. And more actually was going from...
И, следовательно, больше на Запад.
I'm listening to Russian. I cannot have at the same time.
Yeah,
do you hear me? Hello?
Translation seems to have slipped into the main channel.
Okay.
Yeah, Thomas, please carry on. We'll try and fix that. I apologize.
Okay. Now, what we see here has been higher purity on the market. Higher purity on the market is an indication that more supply is on the market. But it also is that cocaine becomes more dangerous. When you have higher purity, there's a bigger threat of people also getting an overdose from cocaine than they used to get before. In terms of the quantities seized, the bulk is Americas. Clearly, number one is Colombia, then comes the United States, but also Brazil, Panama, Peru, Ecuador are very big seizures. Global seizures in North America is 19%. The population of North America is 5% of the global total. So you see there's a real concentration in North America when it comes to cocaine. Overall cocaine, you see, is really dominated global seizures in the Americas. Global America's population is 13%. So you see Americas is really the dominance of cocaine. In terms of the supply
just 1 minute, Thomas, if that's okay. Yeah.
In terms of supply of opiates, what we see here, there is trafficking, particularly from Mexico to the United States for the Americas, and to a very small extent from Colombia, also to the United States. But again, these quantities, Colombia is very, very small. The big quantity, as I said before, is from Afghanistan to Europe, but this hardly affects the Americas. The only exception where we see some trafficking is going to Canada from West Asia, but again, rather small quantities. Total seizures of the Americas account for 8%. So it is, and when we take that most of this takes place in North America, it's again above the global average, but it's not as high or not as important as we have it, for instance, in Europe. But over the years, what we have seen clearly, there's an increase. So we see the increase in trafficking activities, but which also means increase in production activities in South America for the market in the Americas, particularly in North America, particularly in the United States. The big seizures reported by countries. For opium, it's Iran, Pakistan, Afghanistan. Morphine, also Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan. And for heroin, is only one country in the Americas. It's the United States, 9% of the global total. Otherwise, the Americas
9% всего.
Don't play an important role. I apologize. I hear again the translation.
Yeah.
Now, we spoke about the excess of opioids for pain management. Here, what we see is the extremely high levels for North America, which of course is a problem. Because of the high problem, because of the high levels in Northern America, you also have diversion from the opiates. Again, sorry, I have here all the translations.
Can I just ask all the translators to temporarily pause, because we appear, Sarah, to have lost the translation channels, and now everyone can just be heard on the main channel. So I can see now that we've got that back. And Spanish and French are both in their channel. We're just waiting for the Russian to return to their channel. So Thomas, you carry on. French and Spanish translation, please continue. Apologies for that delay. Over to you, Thomas, sorry.
Okay, so for North America, we see a problem of too much opioids being made available. However, when it comes to South America, it's clearly below the global average. We come to Central America, it's even more below the global average, and for the Caribbean, it's hardly anything. So what we see, even we speak about the Americas, it is very, very diverse. You have regions such as basically Latin America, which has not enough pain medication available. On the other side, you have North America, where the amounts are still very high. And I think we have to balance this. We have to balance this on the one side to prevent the diversion. There are measures on the way in North America, particularly in the United States. But the problem is on the other side that people, because of North America, are so much afraid and don't give it to people in other parts of the Americas where they actually would need it. Now, again, here, the global level, you see the big Americas. Over the last couple of years, it has declined. Even so, last 2 years, there was again an increase. But the bad story about the Americas, about the other Americas, is that actually less is available now than a few years ago. So the trend went even in the wrong direction, the opposite direction. In South America, it should have gone up. In North America, it should have gone down. Yes, we see some decline in North America, but we also see a decline in South America where it shouldn't be. There we should see an increase because people need substances for pain management. They do need it, and they don't have it at the moment in many countries of the southern part of the Americas. Okay, at the global amounts, we see there has been destabilization, even a small decline. In terms of methadone and buprenorphine, what we see, high levels of North America, and again, the low levels of South America, Central America, and hardly anything in the Caribbean. So just a repetition, people who are addicted to opiates hardly get treatment they would need in those parts of the world. Okay, but we have another problem in the United States, and this is a big problem. You see most of the opiates indicators are going down, but there's one problem which goes up, is fentanyl. These are the samples submitted to the laboratories. You see massive increases, basically from 2013 to 2019. We see the same story in terms of people dying of deaths. We see at the global level, yeah, I would say a small increase, nothing dramatic. But when it comes to synthetic opioids, fentanyls and tramadol, but we speak about fentanyls, it's still dramatically going up in the United States. So this is a really big problem there. And it's not only fentanyl itself, it's also mixed with other drugs. So we see there's people dying from pharmaceutical opioids mixed with fentanyl going up. We see people dying from heroin. Actually, heroin would go down, but mixed with fentanyl, this part is clearly going up. So fentanyl is and continues to be a big problem for North America. The global quantities, and again, you see the seizures, massive increase over the last couple of years, and it's really fentanyl,
И опять-таки мы видим здесь массивное увеличение потребления.
And by region, you see the dominance of the Americas. It's really a problem of the Americas. It's exists in other parts of the world as well, but the dominance, the problem is really one which is concentrated in Americas, particularly one that is concentrated in North America. In terms of the seizures, where do they take place? You see them at the border with Mexico, in some parts of Mexico, and also at the eastern parts of the United States, where the bulk of the seizures take place of the fentanyl, and there's also actually where the trafficking takes place, where the problem is. Now, in terms of global, the share in seizures, you see that if you transform it into STDs, so the standard units, then clearly fentanyl is #1 at the global level, and particularly if you add up the fentanyl analogs, it is clearly #1 ahead of codeine and ahead of tramadol.
Thomas, we're going to have to end here, I'm afraid, because I need to make sure we've got time for our other speakers.
Okay.
Would you be able
to a few more important things, yeah?
Okay.
On the amphetamine type stimulants, we see a massive increase. America's heavily involved in methamphetamine. We see a concentration of drug trafficking in the Americas, but we see even more concentration of production. 85% of labs are seized in the Americas, particularly in North America. We have been seeing in terms of ecstasy, yes, Americas also exists. It is 20%, but here, Western and Central Europe, Europe as a whole, is still more important than North America. In terms of cannabis, and there is the cultivation, particularly the cultivation, the indoor cultivation, which is increasing, which high THC. Chloe was mentioning this. We see an increase in cannabis use, particularly in the daily use. The daily use is the one which is problematic. This increase is particularly strong in North America. We see for Europe kids, it's stable. For the United States, it's increasing. In general, we see, yes, cannabis increasing, but the problem is really the daily, near daily use. That's massively increasing in the United States. We see it also in Canada, and we see it also in Uruguay, but even in other parts of South America, we see an increase, such as in Chile. Last two words on drug trafficking via the dark web. One of the biggest markets is United States. Even so, we have big markets in Europe, such as Russia, such as the Nordic countries. The single largest market from where the drugs are delivered are the United States. So overall, it's more Europe than the Americas. And we see finally the drug markets have been very strongly changing in recent years, up and down. Overall, however, we see an increase. The increase is particularly strong in 2020 in cannabis, a 5 times increase, also a 5 times increase in stimulants and in cocaine. The good news was NPS was declining and ecstasy was declining by 24.5%. And here I stop my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Apologies for rushing you at the end there, but I want to try and make sure we have enough time for, particularly for some questions as well. So without further ado, it's my great pleasure to hand over now to Mariana Zabaleta, Hi, Mariana. So Mariana is from Reset Drug Policy and Human Rights Argentina, and again has been selected by the UNODC as one of our civil society speakers today. Mariana, over to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Good morning or afternoon for everybody. I will try to share my presentation. Let me see if it works. I think it works. Yes, okay. Well, just to say that I am also a professor and researcher at a national university here in Argentina, la Universidad Nacional de San Martín. I would like to thank the invitation. I think that it is very important to give spaces to civil society to reflect on these problems. I want to highlight some issues from the last World Drug Report from an American perspective, but mainly the purpose of my presentation is to show some analytical challenges that we are facing in the understanding of drug markets, and consequently the need to develop new indicators.
Мы сейчас сталкиваемся с пониманием рынка.
I go on. I need the need to develop new indicators in order to evaluate the outcomes and the impact of the drug control policies we implement. Chloe explained these trends, but it is important to say that there is a growth on the number of people who use drugs in the last year, with a 22% increase between 2010 and 2019. And it's important to remark that the available data for America shows that the annual prevalence of consumption of our countries are higher than the global ones. And if we see, on the other hand, the indicators related to supply, the supply side of the problem, we see also that America stands out on the global stage. Here we can see, for instance, two of the main markets in the Americas that are expanding, the cannabis and cocaine one, with the highest annual prevalence rates. However, one of the most interesting issues I wanted to refer from the last World Drug Report is the verification of the great resilience that drug markets have, related mainly to the great adaptation capacity of criminal organizations. This is explained in the report, and Chloe referred to these trends related to larger shipments, the increased use of private aircraft, the increased use of waterway routes, and the development of new delivery methods without contact. Another important thing I wanted to recall from the report is that it is previsible that COVID crisis impact will produce, as a result, a growth not only in the consumer markets, but also in the expansion of production and trafficking. Just to have a clear picture of what happens in America, we can reflect on one of the main drug markets, the cocaine one. According to the report, there is a clear market expansion related to cocaine and some alarming trends. The reduction of prices, the improvement in the quality, and the diversification of the traffic chains, meaning that we have a notable growth of the actors involved and higher levels of competitions between criminal networks and organizations. In this context, the South American trafficking route has acquired a new and more complex dynamism with a remarkable role of the river routes from producer countries through Paraguay to the Atlantic ports of departure in Argentina and Uruguay, related to the growth of the consumption in Europe. So the cocaine international trafficking route from South America to Europe has become the second most important globally. The important thing is that this resilience of drug markets, and in particular the trends we can see on the cocaine market, let us question one of the basic assumptions of the international community that in some way refers to increasement in law enforcement. And we can see that this increase in seizures of drugs, detentions, incarcerations do not seem to have a real impact in the size of illicit markets and the availability of drugs. So one of the analytical challenges we have to understand what is happening with drug markets is a need to improve our indicators. I don't want to speak about demand indicators because we all know that they have some limitations, but it is important to reflect on supply indicators. All of the indicators we use are of the indirect nature, and we still don't have indicators to understand the outcomes and the impact of our drug control policies. Just to recall, the last, I participated in the evaluation in 2009, and I remember that we knew at that moment that we have serious limitations to make an evaluation of the results of our policies, no? And to remind also the ministerial declaration that affirms that the drug markets are expanding and diversifying, and that the most indicators we are using show record levels year tras year. So just to focus on what is the way forward, of course I want to, we really appreciate the World Drug Reports because the data they bring to us and the analysis is really important, but we really need to develop new indicators. And just to mention some of them, I would like to mention the need to construct indicators that show which is the focus of the police and judicial persecution, and we will see that our systems of persecution are focused in the less complex manifestations of criminal organization. We have to need to construct indicators that show if we are effectively dismantling criminal networks and organizations, if we really do have an impact in their economic products, to analyze deeply which are the adaptation strategies they allow them to be resilient, to analyze the diversification patterns and how drug trafficking relates to other criminal manifestations, and to have an evaluation that could distinguish market levels and different stages of the market chain. So the idea is we need, if we want to understand better why these criminal markets are resilient as they are,
И также эластичность.
we need to improve our qualitative and quantitative research. And in this task, we think that we need to have a deeper participation of the academia and the civil society. Just to finish, I repeat that we need to do this in order to appreciate the most important analytical issue these days, that is, if the efforts we are doing are effective for the reduction or containment of drug markets, and if we effectively are tackling the more complex and damaging aspects of the criminal activity. The painful backside of this resilience for us is the urgent need to evaluate the effectiveness of drug control policies based on evidence we still don't have. Thanks, that's all for now.
Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation and also for sticking to time as well. I really appreciate it, Mariana. And I think, Mariana, if it's okay, we will make the slides available, if that would be okay with you, to the participants as well, because I think that's going to be really useful. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to particularly to our speakers. I did say we'd make some time at the end for questions. We have had lots of questions submitted, and I can see that our UNODC colleagues have been answering some of those already. I just want to, I know we're at the 30 minutes past the hour, but I do want to just ask a few questions, just give a little bit of time, just 5 or 10 minutes to raise some of these questions. So in particular, there's been lots of comments and questions from the perspective of access to controlled medicines and palliative care. So in particular, I know this came through, Thomas, in your interventions, but what strategies are there to change the and it says image, but to change the perceptions of this problem around the access to essential controlled medicines, particularly in low middle income countries? That question comes from Tanya Pastrana. And similarly, there's questions from Catherine Pettus and a few others also about the same issue around palliative care. So I wonder, Chloe and Thomas, if you're able to elaborate slightly more on that topic. And just quickly, before I hand over, just another quick question at the same time. Following up on the data you presented, that drug use in Africa is projected to increase, and that's linked, as we've seen in the answers Chloe's provided, that's linked to an increase in the youth population in Africa. But one of the questions from Mam Dien is, what is the policy response to that challenge? If it's been identified as the future trend, what is the policy response to that challenge? Because, and Mom continues that we cannot incarcerate all of these youths. What would the advice of UNODC be? So I just think they're really pertinent questions. I'd love to hear your responses. So if you'll indulge me just for a few minutes, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Sorry, I don't know, is Chloe still here? Do you see her?
Let me just, I don't see her. So Thomas, I don't know, are you able to field those questions? Yeah, thank you.
So let's help me with the first question was on
access to medicine and palliative care, and what do we do to rectify the huge gaps that you've identified?
I really wanted to say this task actually is not really the task as such of UNODC, that's the task of the INCP. Having said this, also the data, what we're presenting is data from the INCP, and very, very happy that they shared the data with us. But we wanted to make it clear because we think it's an extremely important issue, and to make it as much as public as possible, there is a major discrepancy. So I think, and some of this we have already achieved because people, I think, pick it up. So that's the first part. But of course, now the next part is what to do against it. And we do have the international drug control system. And in the system, countries have to provide the estimates to the INCB. And based on the estimates of the INCB then somebody exports the data, the narcotics, and INCB agrees to it. The problem is that in many low-income countries, the officials do not fill in these forms out properly. And I think there's really a basic need of education, and I think also of the NGOs to make them aware. Sick people don't exist only in Europe and in North America. There are also sick people in other parts of the world. And I mean, this, which is so obvious. There are people who have cancer, not only in Europe, not only in Australia, not only in North America. There are people who have cancer in other countries. And this has to be done. So we have a system in place, but it is really a need for member states, to say, yes, we have so many sick people and they can do it. Yeah, so many sick people, so many people of cancer patients, so and so. We estimate so much would be required. And this is then sent to INCB, and INCB is more than happy, I know, to say, yes, fine. We are very fine with it because we want to have increase. So the initiative of this actually came from INCB to say it's not possible that there are countries, particularly in West Africa, who say we don't have sick people in our countries. It's not possible. There are sick people in West Africa. So and so it is the countries in those regions who really have to use the system. The system is here, but it has to be used. And the system is very simple to say, we have so many people, so much will be needed, so much has to be imported. So I think that's the most important. Second, the doctors. There has to be awareness of the doctors that to sick people, you have to give painkillers. It is so obvious, but people don't understand this, apparently. They don't understand that the person who suffers from pain needs a painkiller. And these basic things have to be led on. I think this is a big role of the NGOs to tell their ministries, to tell their officials, we have sick people in our country. Yeah, and I think the World Drug Report is an instrument here to help them with their task, to say that's not possible. At the same time, we are not saying everything is fine, and we are pointing to the problems which exist in North America, to the problems which exist. It's not to say diversion doesn't take place, it cannot take place. Of course it can take place. Therefore, we have systems in place, system money to do it. But the answer not to give pain medication to people who need it is just the wrong answer. And I think we said this quite clearly in the World Drug Report. We say it again, we have said it last year, we say it this year, and we're going to say it again next year. And I think this is extremely important, but therefore we are really counting on you, on the NGO community, to say, now we're taking this and we're picking it up, and we come to our authorities to say, please, that's not possible. Okay. So this is really this what we can do first of all. Sorry, and the second question was on
was around the projected increase in drug use in Africa, and what is the policy recommendation? Yeah. Given that this seems to be driven by the youth.
Again, this is something which somebody who looks around, it is quite obvious. Africa has a young population. Africa has a young population, particularly also of males. Males are particularly vulnerable to drug use. Particularly people who are not in an unemployment situation are particularly vulnerable to drug use. In Africa, we have many people, young people, males, who are not in a good employment position. So, I mean, all these risk factors exist here. Plus, we get it now in more and more international market. Some decades ago, yes, cocaine and heroin didn't arrive in Africa, so they couldn't use it because it wasn't there. This has changed. Africa is becoming a transit region. So more and more drugs are coming to Africa, and some of them, we know the idea of spillovers. Some of them, some of the facilitators will be paid in drugs, and those people who are paid in drugs afterwards have to market it, have to sell it locally. And so we have really spillover effects in those areas where the drugs are being trafficked. And Africa is particularly vulnerable to these issues. And so this, we have been saying, please look into this. And again, I think it's the word of the World Drug Report to say, yes, for the time being, the drug problem may be still comparatively low in Africa, but this is going to change. This don't change here merely of economics, of demographics. And so we are alerting at a rather early stage of trends which we are really seeing in the trends which we are seeing. And so the international community has to do something about it. Of course, what is the big problem in Africa? For the time, we have very few good monitoring systems in place. So and any donor asks you before you gives money. So what is your evidence? What's your proof? I don't have evidence. I have a proof. So you don't get money. So it's a real vicious circle. And again, we try to break it. So we're very happy, particularly with Nigeria, of the survey which was done, which really alerted countries in the region of the problem. But again, Nigeria is not Africa. Nigeria is very important for Africa, but there is more in Africa than just Nigeria. So we really would like to see far more of this happening in other parts of Africa as well. There are also modern technologies in coming to the question of indicators. This is the wastewater analysis. And I also made reference to this. I think it's an extremely interesting area where you can, particularly in urban areas, where you can get an idea of what the consumption is, what the consumption trends is, at the local level, where policies work, where policies do not work, because we see it immediately. If it's increasing, if it's declining, there were interventions, very useful, but not useful. I mean, you have police interventions, you have prevention activities, you have treatment services, and at the moment, very often in many governments, many authorities have no idea what works. Basically, they have policies and they are blind. And imagine a big company, a corporation say, I don't do any bookkeeping. I feel my product is good and I will make money with it. Say, sorry, I mean, you need a cost accounting. You need to have an idea, a bookkeeping, do I make really a profit or made a loss? You have to know it, is my strategy correct or is it not? And for this, you need the basic information. And I think this is there, and we definitely promote this. And we also say, definitely also for Africa, this is needed, very much needed, to know what is happening, also what is working and what's not working.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much, Thomas. I really appreciate your responses. So yeah, I think we'll end there, because thank you for those of you who have stayed with us. I know we've gone slightly over time, but I hope you found this a useful session. I hope it's been interesting to learn a bit more about the World Drug Report, and I really encourage you to follow the link that we've been putting into the chat. You know, download this report, read this report. It's you know, a really important resource for our sector. Thomas.
There was one of the very quickly looked at the questions, and there was one question regarding the darknet. And I just wanted to say this year, for the first time, we used a so-called web crawler, to really see what's on the dark web, to get the information right directly from there, to see what's happening, where it's increasing, where it's declining. And again, I think this is fantastic tools which do exist.
То есть здесь нужно посмотреть, нужно получать информацию, какова картина, какова ситуация на так называемом dark web.
Sorry,
И, соответственно,
you've slipped into the main channel again. But I think we're finishing now anyway. So yeah, Thomas, did you want to finish that point? And then...
Yeah, no, and I think we have done it, we've used it. Of course, it's challenging. It's not as easy as you might think always, but it's something to exploit more. And the other thing, again, coming back to the wastewater stuff, I think this is an extremely useful tool. And a good example is here China. China, for a few years ago, had no idea of how to do wastewater. Today, they are one of the leading countries doing wastewater analysis. And I know it's now spreading to many countries, also among developing countries. And again, we are also helping, assisting people to bring them together with the know-how, how to do it best. And just we would invite you to come to us, and we would help and assist and bring you together with those specialists.
Okay, we really do have to end there. But thank you so much, Thomas. I do appreciate your enthusiasm and everything you've kind of taught us today about the work that the research unit is doing. So it just leaves me to thank again our speakers, particularly thanks again to our translators in English, Spanish, and Russian. Sorry, in French, Spanish, and Russian today. Thanks for your contributions. And of course, thank you to the UNODC Civil Society Unit for co-hosting this event with us today. And to Sarah Perker from the VNGOC, who has helped to put all this together. So that's it for me, but I'd like to hand over to Mirella for some closing remarks and some final words from your side, Mirella. You're on mute, Mirella.
Yeah, thank you again to everybody who participated and who stayed with us. We are 15 minutes beyond time, so I think it was a very interesting discussion. We heard, of course, from the expert. Thank you, Chloe and Thomas. The World Drug Report remain really very, very interesting and very useful tool. There are always means to improve, and we've heard some suggestion coming from civil society. The thing is that they don't. It's not always feasible, but it's good to hear. It's good to hear the voice of civil society. And as we spoke a lot to access of medicine, I would like really to remind that it was really the civil society that brought to the attention of the Commission on Narcotic Drugs that the interpretation of the convention in some countries were going in the wrong way, and that, you know, please do not make us suffer anymore. That was a big slogan. And again, we owe it to the civil society organization. At that time, it was the Cancer Union that brought it to the table. Nothing to add anymore. I'm sure you're all tired, but the books, the booklet is there. It's online, and please read it. And if any urgent question, we can always answer later. Enjoy the rest of your day or the evening. Thank you, Jamie and Sarah, and all the best. Bye.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you very much.
Bye.